Hello, Sophie here from Prospology, and I'm here with Julianna Merten. Juliana came from a pharmacy background, and for the past 4 years, she's been kind of freelancing, doing her own thing as a writer. And so I'm really grateful to have you here with us today, Juliana. Thank you. What would you say was the most challenging part in making that transition for you in kind of setting up your business and just going through that change?
So I don't have any type of business background I had to develop an LLC. I had to set up QuickBooks. I didn't know how to read contracts. So all of those sort of how to run a business, was very stressful for me and still one of my least favorite things to do. I hate contracts. So that part was definitely the challenging part for me more than the writing itself.
Mm-hmm. And did you get any support with that along the way? I believe you've had some coaching before, but I'm not sure what that
Right.
was for.
No, I've been like in coaching since the beginning. um, I'm a coach addict, if you will, but um, one of the other things that I didn't have a lot of knowledge in was even just the selling and marketing myself. So I actually started with someone who does that to sort of get comfortable talking to other people, to get a website up, update my LinkedIn profile, figure out how to reach out to customers. And early on became apparent, one of the really good advice from her was that, if there is something that you don't know how to do, you need to decide when to hire that done. So I have an accountant, I hire a web designer, I hire a lawyer to read my contracts. Just because the amount of I tried to build my own website, and after like 28 hours, I was like, this doesn't cash flow. Like, there's no way. This doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I'm not afraid to hire someone to do what I don't know how to do, or even what I don't want to do sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it's definitely something that I've learned how to do and implement more as time goes on. Because if you are taking it seriously and this is your future and your career, then investing a bit in the beginning, especially with things like marketing, that is absolutely essential for showing your professionalism, being able to communicate your skill set. And it does make the selling easier. It makes making those relationships easier because people can see that credibility in the online presence that you have. So it might feel like a big hurdle in the beginning or like a series of smaller hurdles, but once you've overcome them, I imagine as for you, um, I imagine it was for you as it is for most people, where you just start to things just kind of smooth out after that because you don't have to redo them over and over again. Like once they're done, they're done.
Right, right. It became easier, and I am updating my website because my focus has changed more. I'm not necessarily willing to do as many different types of things as I was in the beginning. But you have those skills now of what you want to write about, how to find someone. So
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not letting it to be a barrier to start because you can always make changes and you can always say, no, I don't want to offer this anymore, or my rate has changed, or I don't enjoy that area of writing anymore. So, you give yourself that freedom still. So that's cool. What are your favorite projects to work on these days?
I stick to hematology, so that's been nice for me. As a pharmacist, that was all I really did for 20 years is hematology. So I know that content well. And when I first started out, I did some solid tumors, but still only did oncology. And while I could learn that, it did take longer for me to do a project than it does if it's something in heme where I already have a really good baseline knowledge. So I've been lucky enough to really stick to projects in my specialty area, which is nice. Um, I don't like regulatory work. I discovered that early on that was a little bit tedious for me. So I tend to stick more, to projects that are a slide deck or a review article or, things that are just not so tedious.
Yeah. I think it's a love or hate kind of relationship that people have with regulatory. For me, it's never been something that's appealed to me either. So I pretty much just eliminated that from day one, but it leaves a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Did you have like a period of time where you are more experimental with different things before you really knew what you wanted to do? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, um, I was willing to do a lot of different things. I knew hematologists at Mayo well, and was willing to write grants for them. And it ends up that Mayo doesn't allow that for you to be a freelancer and an employee. So I ended up not being able to get paid for that type of work. Um, so I didn't end up pursuing grant writing because my network couldn't hire me in that area. I did a lot in the CE type of area initially, and I do enjoy that. And then I've also moved into kind of the medcom space, with doing advisory boards and slide decks and reviews and different things in that area.
Hmm. Did you find that you were um, comfortable with the experimental phase, or did you feel did you feel any imposter syndrome or any doubt that you might be able to make it work?
Um, I don't have that with this type of content. I'm moving a little bit into strategy, and that gave me a little bit more of a, I don't know if you're qualified to do that, sort of second guessing. But what I found is that they really value my insights, in that way. And so instead of just giving it away, you need to charge for that as well. But with my clients on the medcom side, that's one of the things that they value, is that you understand how providers think and how this works in the real world and what the actual barriers for patients are. So that one has been a stretch, but didn't have that so much with writing. I did a lot of writing in my old job. I presented as a pharmacist. I did a lot of teaching. I had done publications. I had done my own research trials. So I wasn't uncomfortable with those aspects.
Hmm. I'd love to talk more about those transferable skills that you brought from pharmacy into your work now, because I think a lot of people have a hard time getting their head around how they do have the skills necessary to be a medical writer, and maybe not even getting into the strategy yet because that might come with more confidence. But having that awareness of what the patient goes through or what the clinicians go through, how has that been useful for you, and how have you been able to give that a practical application?
Sure. If you've taken care of patients somewhere, you can write patient cases that are much more realistic and much more believable than someone who hasn't. It's just a spin that you have, that you can give a voice to that they can't. I've done video scripts, and I can write those while my kids are in the swimming pool. Like, they're not heavily data driven necessarily. It's data you'd have off the top of your head, not that you need a reference library to reference, but you can develop that conversation because you've had them. So that was definitely something. Um, I did a lot of teaching, so I had been developing slide decks for years. And I've been either writing or editing, abstracts, manuscripts, protocols for a long time. And so that was not any different to do for a different audience. Those same communication skills that you use with physicians and other leaders in an institution are the same when you're talking to clients. You already know how to work with people. And same for project management. You've been doing that for a long time. So you can manage those for your own business, just like you could manage a committee, and what that committee's goals were. So
Yeah. And would you say that the coaching and having the coaching from the beginning was what helped you make those connections between like your previous career path and then the one that you were moving into?
yeah, I mean, several times in my journey, I've had to go back to, what do people say your strengths are? Um, and, look at that from these are what your strengths are. And those haven't changed from when I was practicing as a pharmacist to what I do now. They're the same things. So yeah, it definitely helps to have someone sort of draw out, what do you do well? What do other people come to you for? Um,
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier as well about how knowing your strengths means that you can also outsource the things that are not your strengths.
Right.
Because I was in a similar boat. I mean, I don't know how, but I figured out how to build a website and it actually looked good for my first few versions. But the accounting side, I really struggled with. I did have mentorship with that from someone in like a entrepreneurship
Mhm.
program. But ultimately, I ended up getting an accountant as well because it just took so much energy from me to do the numbers that I wanted to focus on the people. I wanted to focus on the relationship building and the actual communications stuff that I loved. And I do think that we're typically quite hard on ourselves in general, and we expect ourselves to just know everything or do everything. And in reality, it's just not very likely that anybody would have that. I mean, the stronger your medical background, the less likely you are to have sales or marketing or accounting experience. And the more of that you have done, the less clinical expertise you're going to have, or the less academic or teaching expertise you're going to have. So that's going to become a struggle. And so then it's just a case of kind of managing those resources because like you said, you just divert them towards the areas that need them the most, and then you focus on what you can personally do to move the needle.
Yeah. I definitely look at it in a, you know, what would I pay myself to do this and how long will it take? And what can you hire this done for that you can do something different in the meantime and bill for?
So I guess my last question to you would be, if you were speaking to somebody who was just about to embark on setting themselves up as a freelance medical writer and they were feeling pretty apprehensive and overwhelmed, what is like the number one thing that you would say to them to just reassure them that it's going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think the know thyself is helpful and to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are so that you can leverage that. If you know that you need accountability, you can find that. If you know that you need help with writing, but you have the clinical knowledge, you can find that. If you know that you have skills, but you're not comfortable talking to people or talking about yourself, you can develop those things. So I think that is the biggest thing, is to really understand yourself and what will help you to make this sustainable. I think that's been one of the biggest things for me, is kind of understanding my own strengths and weaknesses and where I need help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why coaching was so beneficial for you, because if you have someone who can personalize their support to suit what you need and
Mhm.
adapt as they learn more about you and as you try things and then see what they actually feel like in real life, that is the most, it's just the most successful way to go about it because ultimately if you feel good while you're doing it, it's going to continue. And if you feel like it's overwhelming or stressful or unsustainable,
Mhm.
then it's not. And so it really can be the difference between success and failure if you have someone who's able and willing to listen and adapt and support and kind of, you know, celebrate you for what you're great at and then say, you know what, you don't have to be great at everything. Like,
Right. To ask you those questions of like, is that really true? Do you need to be able to do that?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Exactly, because sometimes in our minds it's so much worse than it actually is, or the implication is so much
Mhm.
bigger than it actually is. And all the time I'm hearing people say, oh, I have to work at an agency for 2 years before I'm allowed to freelance. And like they just have all these beliefs that, like, oh, I need to get this, or I need to do that first, or I need to do X amount of time here or there. And it's all in their minds because they don't realize the value that they bring in other areas, or that collectively it's enough and that they can go from there, because we're all learning and developing every day and nobody has it all figured out.
Right, right. I don't think there's one right path um, to do this.